So when we look at the characters, let's see the kinds of details that the fictional writer gives us about Pi. Here's an example. I noticed something else. His cupboards are jam-packed. Behind every door, on every shelf, stand mountains of neatly stacked cans and packages, a reserve of food to last the siege of Leningrad. So clearly, Pi has never got over the trauma of being on that lifeboat without food for all those days. So here, he still collects it. And the trauma is emphasized, for example, here. At times he gets agitated. It's nothing, I say very little. It's his own story that does it. Memory is an ocean, and he bobs on its surface. I worry that he'll want to stop, but he wants to tell me his story. He goes on. After all these years, Richard Parker still preys on his mind. And from all of his interviews, the fictional writer concludes about Pi that he's a sweet man. When we come to the gods and the religious icons in his home, it's obvious that he would worship Ganesha. At the entrance hall hangs a framed picture of Ganesha, he of the elephant head. He sits facing out, rosy-colored, pot-bellied, crowned and smiling, 3 hands holding various objects, the 4th held, palm out, in blessing and in greeting. He is the Lord overcomer of obstacles, the God of good luck, the God of wisdom, the patron of learning. Now it's very obvious that Pi would value such a God. Notice there's a sign of benevolence. Benevolence is wishing people well. Bene is good. Volo is to wish. And compassion, I think, the blessing and the greeting. And then he's a God who is supreme in overcoming obstacles. That would be obvious as to why Pi would respond to such a God of wisdom, a patron of learning. Pi is an educated man with university degrees behind him, so obviously he would respond to such a God. Pi's home, especially his office, reflects his continued devotion to the 3 religions. The short chapter 21 describes Pi's influence on the fictional writer. So let's have a look at that. I'm sitting in a downtown cafe after thinking. I've just spent most of an afternoon with him. Our encounters always leave me weary of the glum contentment that characterizes my life. What were those words he used that struck me? Ah, yes. Dry, yeastless factuality. The better story. I find it interesting here. He says that he's weary, he's tired of his life. Why? Because all it has is glum contentment. Now, this is a paradox. If you are contented, you are happy, you're satisfied, you're pleased. Glum means miserable, gloomy, unhappy. So he says, yes, his life is successful, but it's kind of missing something. It doesn't have an intense, uplifting quality to it. And after speaking to Pi, he becomes so dissatisfied with his own life. And he's going to come back to this, so it's really important that you make a note of this. He rejects a life that is dry, that is just full of dry facts, because he says such a life is yeastless. Now, you know the function of yeast. It makes bread and what have you rise. It gives it air, it gives it lift, it gives it volume, it doubles in size or whatever. And he says, oh, facts are like eating bread without yeast. And then we've got the better story, and I'm going to come back to that in just a moment as well. And then the writer sums up Pi's character, and I think it's important for us to look at this. I take pen and paper out and write. And remember I said the sense of reality, of actual writing things down, fact, accuracy, precision. And he writes, words of divine consciousness, moral exaltation. Exaltation is like an intense happiness. Lasting feelings of elevation. Elevation is when you are uplifted. Elation. Elation and exaltation are very similar, and they both mean joy. A quickening of the moral sense. If you quicken, it comes to life. It's vibrant. It's existing, which strikes one as more important than an intellectual understanding of things. An alignment of the universe along moral lines, not intellectual ones. A realization that the founding principle of existence is what we call love, which works itself out sometimes not clearly, not cleanly, not immediately, nonetheless, ineluctably. Now, I find those last sentences very interesting as an insight into Pi. Pi has experienced life. He's experienced the idea that God does not talk to individuals, that God does not intervene, even in the most terrible suffering, even in appalling situations. God is apparently silent and absent. But Pi seems to have accepted that not knowing, not understanding, but still believing in the principle of love. So Pi, bewildered, if you like, by the silence of God, the fact that love doesn't come through clearly and cleanly and doesn't come through immediately, but believes ineluctably that love, you can't stop it. It's going to happen. Love will work its way through. So despite everything, Pi has faith in God and believes in God. I pause. What of God's silence? I think it over and I add, an intellect confounded, bewildered, not understanding, yet a trusting sense of presence and of ultimate purpose. And this finally is Pi. This is what he feels and what he believes.